I'm good, thank you. How are you doing, Ben? Oh, thank you. It's really great to be invited, and thanks for your kind comments about my columns back in prehistoric times. Of course. Yeah, I'll make you feel old now, Ben. Because when I do kind of in-person things at drama schools, um, I bring along sort of a copy of the stage as a prop. So I was in one, I think it was last year or the year before, and I said, I'm John Byrne from the stage newspaper, held up the stage, and one of the kids said, "Oh, they've got a newspaper as well," because obviously these days they all read it on apps and things like that. So I didn't know they had a newspaper. So just goes to show you, yeah, yeah. Okay, cool. I'm very well, Ben, and I'm delighted to be here. That's right. I worked for a year in Malawi in Central Africa with UNICEF as their communications officer. And that's actually how I got involved in performing arts because my original job was I trained as a graphic designer. I actually went into cartooning. That was my main job. And the reason I was working with UNICEF was I was helping design health education posters. But when I worked in Malawi, as I say, in Central Africa, what I realized was that there was a lot of work being done there by local groups where they were using theatre to communicate health education issues. And I thought, I suddenly saw there's a great power in theatre and performance to not only entertain, but also to educate. I always had a passion for the arts. As I say, my original background was I used to draw and write comedy and do those kind of aspects of the arts. But when I began to interact with other areas of the arts, performing arts, theatre, music, I suddenly realized that there's a lot of there's a lot of common things to different disciplines in the arts, not just in terms of the performing or the creative side, but also in terms of the things that work when you're trying to build a career in the arts, and maybe also some of the things that don't work, but that we sometimes fall into doing. I think certainly to people starting off. So, for instance, when I went to work for UNICEF, um, I was interested in drawing, and when I saw the theatre stuff being done, I was interested in performing and comedy. But obviously, my job in UNICEF was to communicate things like immunization programs or nutrition. And one thing I learned, one of the differences between doing something as your passion and doing it as a job is that when you're doing it as your passion, when you if you're a performer, you tend to sing the songs from the musicals that you most like. If you're an actor, you tend to play the parts that you most like. But when you start, particularly when you start off, you often have to play the parts or communicate the scripts that you're given. And sometimes that can be a little bit frustrating at the beginning because you're thinking, well, I'm doing this thing. And I know when I start off with a lot of actors who are starting off in the business, and the first few jobs they get might be traveling around primary schools or secondary schools doing theatre and education. And they're thinking, I want to be the lead in a Marvel movie. I want to be in the National Theatre. Why am I traveling around primary schools? But the truth is, every time you get a job that you wouldn't necessarily have chosen for yourself. And you learn to really sort of get that job and make the best of it. You're learning skills that are really going to stand to you for the rest of your career. My son just got married about 2 weeks ago. But I remember, thank you. I remember back when he was 8 years old, actually, no, 4 years old, taking him to these kind of small theater shows of Beauty and the Beast or Little Red Riding Hood and things like that. And I remember it was very interesting when you go to that kind of show. I remember one particular one where it was in Wimbledon. It was at some Saturday market at Wimbledon. As part of the Saturday market, they had, I think it was Little Red Riding Hood was the show. So myself and my son went to see Little Red Riding Hood, and we sat in this little hut. And there was about three actors doing Little Red Riding Hood, four kids who were all in there, sort of in 3 years old or 4 years old. And it was really interesting because most of them were actors who probably wanted to be somewhere else, and this wasn't their dream. Um, but there was one guy who played the wolf, and he obviously made the decision that if he was going to play the wolf in a shed in Wimbledon on a Saturday, he was going to be the best wolf that ever wolfed in a shed. And actually, I contacted him afterwards, and I said, I'm John from the stage. I'd like to see if I can get you into the stage because actually, I really appreciated the commitment that you gave to that role. So I think one thing that early experiences can do for us, they can help us to build resilience. But also they can open up opportunities for us that we might not realize they're opening up for us. Mhm. I think, but one of the things I always say is that those of us who are in the arts, we're basically storytellers. That's what we do. Whether we do it through song or through acting, we tell stories. And the reason that stories are so powerful when we tell them or sing them is because stories are powerful, and every human being responds to stories. So just because we're storytellers doesn't mean that we also don't respond to stories. And the reason I say that is because if you sit down on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon and you watch those movie biopics of actors or musicians, or and there've been some recent ones as well. Um, but it basically starts off, the actor or musician starts off in their career, and they have their years of struggle, and then they start to become successful, and then they become more successful, and then they become the international superstars that we know them as, or that we knew them as. Um, and I think sometimes as performers, we can start to buy into that story, that the career is a linear one, that you start off and you make you and you go up and up and up and up, and no careers are like that. I mean, every career is, it's more like a roller coaster, to quote my Irish compatriot Ronan Keating. Our careers are always going to be ups and downs, so we're going to have maybe a big job, and then a two small jobs, and then a big job, and then maybe nothing for a little while, and then so I think it's really important to kind of understand that, because then if we have had a big job and then we have to take on a smaller job, it doesn't mean that our career is not moving in the right direction. It just means that's how arts careers move. So I think the understanding of how things work, and I think we live in the kind of social media era now, where everybody's putting their career highlights out on social media, so we can easily judge our own career by the fact that we're seeing other people opening in shows or seeing cast announcements. But again, that's just because that's the highlights of their career. We don't see their backstage, and we tend to judge our backstage when we see other people's highlights. Absolutely. I mean, I think you were asking earlier on about, as we age, do our egos kind of sometimes get a little bit more out of control? But I've seen the opposite happen. I remember in the very early days of working for the stage, when I was doing it was a similar column to the Careers Clinic. It was called Dear John. So basically, it was people would send in their queries and I would answer them. And I remember it was actually a fax, because fax was still the big technology. So for anybody who doesn't remember what fax was, it was basically like a letter that came through a machine. It was before email came along. Fax was instant communication. So I had a fax number in the stage, and I got this letter by fax. But it was from, and I won't mention the name, but it was from somebody who was very well known as a Bond girl in one of the James Bond movies. Um, and so, by all sort of standards, had achieved recognition because it's a classic James Bond movie. She's a Bond girl in the movie, and she said, "Dear John, I know you're the person that sort of deals with sort of issues or gives advice on the stage. I would love to be in a panto. I'd love to be in a panto. Nobody ever thinks of inviting me to be in a panto, but my dream is to be in a panto." And I thought it was really interesting, because for most people, the public and even performers, they might say, well, being a Bond girl in a James Bond movie, is a very high profile, successful role. But for this particular actress, for her dream was to be in a panto. So I think having our own goals can be different from the goals that the outside world suggests that we have. And I think she eventually got to do that. And I think that for her was a big win for her, because that was a dream that she had, that she wanted to achieve. And I think we shouldn't adjust our standards or our dreams to suit what other people tell us we should dream about. Yes. Yeah. I think that's absolutely true, and I would sort of add one more thing that I know some young performers are concerned about as well. So you see, you quite rightly say that um, it can be upsetting to put something out on social media and be laughed at. Um, I also often these days talk to young performers and young creatives who have spent a long time doing something like a little video sketch or a song or something, and they put it out on social media. And it isn't that they get laughed at; it's just that it gets two likes, or it gets, or nobody sees it at all, and they get very despondent. And so to those, I would explain, look, the way social media works is it's all about these algorithms and things like that. So the way that social media presents stuff to everybody else on social media is not just based on how good it is. It's based on different algorithms. It's based on the topics. It's based on whether you, in some cases, subscribe to their premium package. It's got a whole range of things. So just because something hasn't been seen by anybody doesn't mean you can't put it out again at a different time and it might be seen by more people and so on. But I think that also applies to and you will. I mean, unfortunately, the social media companies are not great at policing sort of people who come on just to be negative. So the truth of the matter is that you may well get negative comments from people, but the thing is, those people don't matter. Those people are sitting at home, wishing they could do what you're doing, and so whatever they're posting on social is all about themselves. It's not about you. And I think another thing that I think with any whatever social platform people are on is something, and it's not a trick. It's something that's actually good to do. Is if I think sometimes people think, well, I'm afraid to put something out in social media because it's putting myself out there and I'm going to be judged and so on. And we can sometimes think of social media as a place where we have to keep putting stuff out, but it can also be a place where we just support other people. So if somebody else does something that I like, I'll like it or retweet it or so on. And that's a good thing to do for two reasons. One, because it takes the pressure off me to be always posting stuff. But secondly, it means that if I'm doing that and doing that regularly, then of course those same people, maybe not all of them, but they're going to do the same thing when I put stuff out. So building a community for yourself on social media can be really helpful, and build a community of positive, supportive people, your fellow students, sort of other performers who are doing their best and so on. Because I think if on social media, if we don't build our own communities, then we're going to let the social media build the community for us, and it won't be full of the positive people that we deserve to have in our community. Absolutely, and I think, I mean, as I mentioned, I started off as a cartoonist, but also a comedy writer, and the advice I used to give to comedians or to comedy writers is the best way to start in comedy is just get out there and start telling jokes. And don't be so concerned that every joke's going to get a laugh, because it won't. So I think a similar thing applies, because eventually, if you just do enough jokes, you'll start to pick up on the ones that go down well, and you can do more of those. But almost take the pressure off yourself that everything you put on social has to get lots of likes and applause and so on. Just put stuff out there that you enjoy, and as you said, keep doing it consistently. And then somebody may see one thing that you've done that they like, and then they'll say, "Oh, this person is doing stuff that I enjoy. So let me go back and see what else they've done." So I've seen cases where performers have put stuff out there without much response. Then they do one that gets a good response. Then all of a sudden, their other posts start to get likes and responses as well, because people have suddenly engaged with the performer. I think really a good thing to understand about networking, because I think people often everybody gets told to network in freelance professions, and it can sound like a very transactional thing where it's if I do something for you, you have to do something for me. But what I've realized is that you never know. I mean, so that the question that you asked, Ben, is a really good one. I think back over my career. Um, there's some opportunities that I've had that I thought were going to lead to something really big, and they didn't. And there's some things I did that I hardly even thought about that ended up leading to big opportunities. So what I've learned is that everything that I do, I try and do it well and professionally, no matter whether it seems like a big thing or a small thing, because I never know which of those seeds that I'm planting is going to flourish. Um, and the other thing that I kind of learned about networking, and I didn't know this at the beginning, I mean, I'll tell you. The stage has its Christmas party um, at the end of January. I think it's now called the New Year party, but it used to be the Christmas party. But it's at the end of January because if they had the Christmas party at Christmas, then all the guests would be in Panto, or most of them would be. So it'd be a very empty sort of event. So I mean, when I started off at the stage, which is about 25 years ago, I was a young journalist starting off. And I used to be really nervous going to it because there were lots of big stars there that I recognized, and and obviously, like everybody, as freelancer, I was thinking, well, I must be networking. And at that point, I thought that networking was me talking about myself. You know, must make sure that everybody I meet knows that I do this other stuff so they can give me a job. And then as I got a little bit older and wiser, I realized actually I needed to be networking by talking less and listening to other people, because it's in the listening to other people that you realize, oh, this person. So, and a good example was I spoke to an actress who had been given the job of writing a, a radio series about the Ramayana, which is an important kind of Hindu spiritual text. Um, and she was concerned because she had obviously performed stuff on stage before, but hadn't written for radio. And she was thinking, how can I break up this really important story into episodes for the radio? Um, and when she was, I said, well, working as a cartoonist at the time, which I still was, it's a bit like doing a comic strip for a newspaper, because what I learned from doing that was you had to recap what had happened in the last episode for people that hadn't read the last episode, and then tell a bit of the story, and then end on a point where somebody wants to hear the next episode. And she said, "Oh, would you mind collaborating with me on the script, because that would be really useful experience." And out of that, I got into some radio writing. Which wouldn't have happened if I hadn't listened to what she was talking about that was important to her in the first place. I think one thing that you're guaranteed to get, whatever age you are in the entertainment industry, is you're guaranteed to get lots of advice. And as I always say, you get three kinds of advice. You get good advice, you get bad advice, and then occasionally you get two pieces of advice that are both really good pieces of advice, but they can't be done at the same time. And so I mentioned that how I got from drawing cartoons to more the performing side was I had a little stand-up comedy act that involved me drawing cartoons on stage with a flip chart, and did it in various comedy clubs around London. And this is again was in the days when it was a flip chart, as opposed to these days you'd have screens or touch pads, and it would be probably work a lot better. Because if you're on stage with a flip chart, one thing that I learned really quickly was how many L-shaped comedy clubs there are in London. So half the audience couldn't see what I was doing. But I remember getting some really, I got two pieces of really good advice on the same night, um, both from two really experienced comedians. And one of them said to me, um, what you should do is to do this act, what you need to get is a headset, a bit like Madonna or somebody had at the time, because then your hands are free. Because at the moment you're trying to hold the mic and do the drawing, and when you're drawing, the mic's away from your mouth, and nobody can hear you, and that was really good advice to improve the cartoon act. Then another really successful and really good comedian came and said, "I hope you don't mind me saying, I think you're actually quite a funny guy without the cartoons. So if I was you, I'd drop the cartoons and just do the comedy." So two equally good pieces of advice, but obviously only one of them was one that I could carry forward. I stuck with the cartoons because I thought um, it just gave me a different thing that I was doing. Because if I mean, maybe he was just being kind, but let's take at face value that I could have done the comedy without the cartoons. I just thought, well, I'll just be another comedian on the circuit doing comedy, and really the cartoons was something that I wanted to keep doing. So I ended up doing it, and eventually I developed it from a kind of an adult act to a more family orientated act, which meant rather than doing it in comedy clubs, I was doing it at festivals. Um, which was worked much better because it was a bigger venue. It was usually in the daytime or the nighttime, so the light was better. People could see what I was drawing and so on. So it worked that way. But yeah. So whenever I'm giving advice to people, I'm always quite clear with them that I'm giving them advice, and there's no right or wrong way to do stuff in this business. There's finding the right way that works for you. So when I'm giving advice to people, what I'm saying is, here's a suggestion, and what I would like you to do is try this suggestion and see if it works for you. And if it works, then great, keep building on it. If it doesn't work, well, then at least think about why it didn't work, and is there a way that you can adapt it to suit you? Yeah, so I think understanding that there isn't one right way in this business, I think, is really important. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I think also, I think it's because we live in a very instant world where, if you Google or ask ChatGPT, you'll get as many different pieces of advice as you want. And it's almost like the thing about advice is advice only works if you put it into action. So I think rather than getting 20 suggestions for things I could do, um, I'd rather sort of have three suggestions for things I could do, give each one a week or two and try it and see which one is actually working when I put it into practice. I think that's one of the great things about going to a school like British Theatre School is students get to put stuff into practice and see how it works. And I think it's to take that leap rather than reading about it. Our profession is one that you can't really just read about or watch videos about. You've got to try it, and it may or may not work. But one of my big heroes is I mean, she's known these days as or was known as a comedian, Lucille Ball, who was in the big 50s, 60s sitcom star in America. What people don't know about Lucille was that she was also a TV producer, and she produced, among other things, Star Trek. It was the production company that Lucille had to produce Star Trek. But her phrase, that's one of my mantras, is she always said, "I'd rather regret things that I've done than regret things that I haven't done." So I think it's really important to put things into action, try them. If they don't work, you haven't failed. You've just learned one thing that doesn't work, and you can try something else. Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. I think for me, what I'm most passionate about is equal opportunities. I think what I again another job that I did in my checkered career was I was the live cartoonist for Nickelodeon. When Nickelodeon first opened in Britain, it had rather than having just wall to wall cartoons, it had live studio presentation, and some very successful people came from Nickelodeon. Dave Berry, who's very well known as a DJ and radio host. Dave came from Nickelodeon at the time I was there. Kelly Bryan, the brilliant singer from Eternal, who's also well known for Loose Women and for Hollyoaks. Kelly was on Nickelodeon for a while, and I was there. And the reason I was there was I was drawing live cartoons on Nickelodeon because it was during the foot and mouth crisis about 10 or 15 years ago, where there was a foot and mouth outbreak in Britain, and they couldn't bring zoo animals into the studio because you couldn't move animals. So they needed somebody needed to replace the orangutans and the pythons. So let's get the Irish bloke who draws cartoons in. Um, but um, but when I was doing it, it was one of those things where it was a new thing I hadn't tried before, and it took a while to work out how to make it work on the screen, but also it was something where I thought, because it was Nickelodeon, I thought that I would be big. I mean, I was quite disappointed because at the time, again, my son was the son who featured previously in the Big Bad Wolf story. He was now 8 years old, so he was like the prime Nickelodeon audience. So I was expecting to get recognized when I went to his school and things, and none of the kids really did. And then I was walking. I lived at the time in Bermondsey, which at the time, if anybody's watching from Bermondsey, but at the time was a much less kind of genteel area than it is today. And I was walking around Bermondsey, and two teenagers approached me, sort of, lads, and they said, "Oi, mate!" And I thought, "Oh no, I'm going to get mugged or something like that." No, no disrespect to Bermondsey, but that's what I thought at the time. And they said, "You're the bloke from Nickelodeon." And then his mate said, "No, you can't be the bloke from Nickelodeon because you live here." And I thought it was really interesting because of where they lived, and we all lived on the same estate. They said people from our estate can't be on television. Um, and the thing is, so I was actually really pleased because by me living on the estate, um, he could see that people from his estate could be on television. And I think we all need to see people who are like us doing stuff, because that's what makes it possible for us. And I think, unfortunately, we still are in a little bit of a rarefied atmosphere where it's only people who have the right accents or go to the right schools, or who get to be sort of in the media on stage. And I think the more, and I know, again, with the school, that you're doing a lot to break that down. And that's important to me as well. I want everybody to feel that they can get involved in this business if they choose to, and if I can support them in doing that, well, that's something that I'm very passionate about. Yeah, and I think the thing is, I always say when I mean, um, I'm a 60-year-old white bloke, so if I want to see 60-year-old white blokes, I can look in the mirror. When I'm watching a show or when I'm watching a play or a musical, I want to see people that are different from me. I want to see sort of people from different parts of the country, different parts of the world, from different backgrounds, from different cultures, because that's not just good for the people from different backgrounds. It makes the whole industry richer, and I think that that's it's really important that we keep, because these days people talk about diversity or inclusion as a dirty word, but actually the truth of the matter is that it makes everything richer. It's the different collaborations between people. It's the fact that people can tell different stories, and I think another great thing is that. Um, when we get actors from the north, or when we get actors from different backgrounds and cultures, some of those actors will continue acting. Some of them may well get into writing or directing. I think there's been a great movement where people are saying, you know what, as an actor, I'm not getting the kind of scripts, or I'm not getting to explore the aspects of my character um, that I would like to. So you know what, if no one else is going to write the script, I'm going to write the script. I'm going to make this thing, and that just creates much more richness and diversity across the whole kind of entertainment industry, and that's to be encouraged. That helps everybody. I think there's great opportunities now that maybe didn't exist when I was starting off, because it seemed like in the whether you were in the music industry, whether you were in the writing, or that aspect of the arts, or whether you were in the performing arts, um, back in the 60s and 70s and 80s, you basically had to be given permission, because the only way to find your audience was to have somebody let you on their stage or let you into their TV studio, and also back then, if you were making your own work, it was kind of assumed that you were making your own work because you couldn't get work anywhere else, which I always thought was ridiculous, because Shakespeare made his own work, and Rembrandt made his own work. So that it was just a ridiculous idea, but it did exist. These days, with social media, with kind of YouTube, with all those kind of aspects, there's definitely more chances to make your own work and get it out there. And similarly, even with live performance and so on, there's more opportunities. Again, to go back to something we spoke about at the very beginning, um, if you don't set your sights on hiring the London Palladium for your first show, if you think, is there a local theatre near me? Is there a local pub that has a performance space upstairs? I think it's being open to looking to see what you have got available to you and making the most of that, and on that, then you can build up. So I think, and I think again, it's the thing about saying, if I'm going to make my own work, I won't have the budget that they have for Hamilton the musical. I won't have the budget that they have for the next Avengers movie. But what can I do within what I've got? And I think what I often find is that having restrictions actually makes you more creative. So back in my stand-up comedy days, um, when I was in a comedy venue that had an L-shaped room. I had to think up of ways to make that part of the act, by grabbing the flip chart and running to the edge of the stage, and basically sort of letting the people on the other side of the stage see it. And so it's almost like, often when we have restrictions, children's television is a good example. Back when I used to work with Nickelodeon, there were certain things you couldn't show or talk about on children's television, and not the obvious things. Um, Obviously, you couldn't talk about adult topics or things, but also if I was drawing superheroes, I couldn't do explosions because um, people at home might run into their bathroom and mix chemicals, and there was all kind of safe things. But you had to find ways to get around that and still be funny and still be interesting. So I think making our own work, even on a small scale, can often make us more creative. You've just shattered my dreams there, Ben. I was hoping that one day I'd wake up and have a long hair. I think one thing that and it's a really interesting one because I'd started off as a freelancer getting my own work. One of the jobs that I was doing was cartooning at the time. One of the papers I was cartooning for was the stage, and the stage was starting to shift into. It was around the time when shows it was like the shows that came before the X Factor, like Pop Idol and those kind of shows were out. And they were interesting because on the one hand they were making people aware that there were ways of starting off in the business of being an entertainer, but the advice, or not the advice, but the picture they were given wasn't the correct idea. You go in front of a panel, you walk in off the street, you've no previous experience, you sing and you become, so it wasn't like a realistic picture. And the stage was really keen to kind of tap into the interest that there was in building careers, but at the same time give good advice. Um, and the editor at the time came to me and said, "Well, look, you're doing that anyway. You're building your own career, and I know you're working with some other performers and giving them advice. So come and be our agony uncle or our career advisor." And when I first started, I had this great I suppose when you start any new job, you're really keen to do well. So obviously, I felt that every advice that I gave should be a golden nugget of wisdom, and I should always, sort of have something profound to say. And as I got into it, I realized that sometimes it wasn't about sort of having that great nugget of wisdom. And I think one of the best pieces of advice I ever gave anybody, which kind of made me see that it was about tailoring it and helping the individual, was a particular performer came to me, and she was a good singer and a good dancer and a good comedian, but she had had her kind of first career breakthrough as an actress in a soap, and the soap was quite popular and her character was quite popular, and all of her friends and her manager were all telling her that she should use that kind of profile to do a one woman show, and they guaranteed her that because of the show she'd sell out all over the country. I'd known her and worked with her for a little bit, and she came to me and said, "Well, I want you to help me sort of do this show, and it has to be because I'm on TV at the moment. they want me to have it out and ready to go in 3 weeks' time. And I said, look, we've worked known each other for a little bit. I think you're a very good singer and a very good dancer with lots of potential. But you're talking about doing a 2 hour show in front of, and because you're well known for this TV show, you're probably going to get quite big audiences as well. And in all honesty, while I think that you've got lots of potential, at the moment you've got about 20 minutes of a good show. And you can stretch 20 minutes of a good show to 2 hours. So what's going to happen right now is you're going to take this contract, you may earn money from it, you're going to go around the country and you're going to get poor reviews because everybody's going to say this person is not ready to take on that level of a show as a one person. Um, and she had to think about it and she turned down the offer. Um, and about 6 years later, she sent me an email saying, John, I just want to say that I really appreciate the advice you gave me not to do the show at the time. It's 6 years later. I've done a lot more classes. I've had a lot more experience live performing. I'm now taking my show on the road and I'm very confident with it. And kind of the lesson that I learned was that, you know, sometimes you give people advice which is based on helping them do something, but sometimes it's also about telling them what they need to hear at the time. And that's not always big, glamorous. You can make it advice. So, sometimes it's realistic advice. Sometimes it's do that a little bit smaller or break that up into steps. And I think that's from then on. That's the way I try and advise people. I try and give them advice that's encouraging and positive, but also realistic. Yeah, I think it's important to say that there are some very, I mean, there are many very good agents in the country which do give advice based on what's best for the client. But I think one of the things that is interesting is when you start off in the business, or if things are a bit quiet, um, a lot of the time you're dealing with the fact that people maybe are not as supportive as they should be, or people are not necessarily giving you encouragement. But I think I always say it's important is if things do start to go well, you're also going to meet the other kind of people who are basically the hangers on, who will tell you everything you're doing is wonderful. And we've all seen examples with movies or with recordings where somebody has, I mean, an example which I think is hopefully not happening as much as it used to, but when people would go on these talent shows and they really can sing and they go in front of the panel and they're awful and the panel makes its funny comments and we all laugh at them. I always found that was really bad because what had obviously happened was either their family or more likely television researchers had convinced this person who obviously couldn't sing that they could sing just so we could all laugh at them. And I think that kind of that's manipulation. And that's so I think everybody needs people in their circle who will give them good and encouraging advice, but also be realistic. And I think if you can gather some of those people around you, that will be a really helpful thing as you move towards your career, both when you're starting off. But I think sometimes you often see that people who are successful in their careers keep a small group of close friends that they've had from the beginning because they know those people will tell them the truth, as opposed to the people who become your friend because you're successful. Well, there's two ways that they can contact me. If they want to contact me care of the stage, I've got I've still got the original email from the Dear John days. It's dearjohn at thestage.co.uk. If they'd like to contact me for advice or for coaching or those kind of services, it's performingcareers at gmail.com. Performingcareers at gmail.com. Yeah, perfect. And obviously, what I'm going to say is that if you just need a piece of advice or a quick question, email me at performingcareers.com. I may not get back to you immediately, but I will get back to you when I can. And I promise I won't try and sell you some expensive coaching program or so on, because it's all about helping people in the long term. Been a pleasure. I've loved it. Thank you so much, Ben. No, that was great, Ben. That was really good questions and topics and things, which I think are really important these days. Yeah. Yeah, I think no, I think what I really liked was, when I came across your website and your school, is it's that mixture of, it's like, um what I always say to people is, it's not it's not necessarily easy, but it's not impossible. And I think, unfortunately, you get the two extremes. If back in my day, maybe it's not the same now, but if you wanted to be an actor or a cartoonist, and you went to some of the old actors or cartoonists, you, oh no, it's a terrible, no, don't go into it, it's a terrible fight, and they just completely put you off. Um, and then, unfortunately, these days you've got the opposite. Do my £900 masterclass, and you'll be guaranteed parts and all that, which is not so. It's getting that middle ground. Yes, yeah, it's the middle ground. I think is what's important.